Hello and welcome. I'm Ruby Barlow and you are watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some headlines of this hour. Iran's military vows crushing strikes against the US and Israel after threats from Donald Trump to escalate military action. The warning signals further escalation, with Trump promising broader and more destructive operations in the coming days. US President Donald Trump says America is nearing completion of its objectives in Iran, claiming key military capabilities have been destroyed. He says the conflict will make the US safer and stronger, framing it as a long-term security investment. China says US and Israeli strikes on Iran are the root cause of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Beijing's response comes after Donald Trump urged countries to take control of the key waterway to protect oil flows. The US Embassy in Baghdad warns that Iran-aligned militia groups may launch attacks in the city within 24 to 48 hours. The embassy urges Americans to leave immediately as regional tensions raise security risks in Iraq. Strikes damage the Pasteur Institute of Iran, a century-old medical facility in Tehran, according to Iran's health ministry. Officials call it an assault on global health security, with images showing severe structural damage and parts of the site in ruins. Hezbollah says it has launched drone and rocket attacks on northern Israel, with air raid sirens triggered across border areas. The Israeli military says there are no immediate reports of casualties or damage following the strikes. NASA's Artemis 2 mission launches successfully, with the crew now in Earth orbit ahead of a journey around the moon. The spacecraft will remain in orbit for checks before possibly heading lunar, marking the first crewed moon mission in over 50 years. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte will visit Washington next week amid tensions with Donald Trump over the Iran war. The long-planned visit comes after Trump criticised European allies, raising questions about US commitment to the NATO alliance. We're now starting the bulletin with some breaking news. Argentina has expelled Iran's diplomatic envoy Mohsen Soltani Tehrani following what the government called false, offensive and baseless accusations by Tehran. The foreign ministry ordered Tehrani to leave the country within 48 hours. The move comes 2 days after Argentina designated Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. Officials said the actions reinforce Argentina's stance on holding Iran accountable for past attacks and underline the country's commitment to national security. Our next development, according to media reports, Iran is reportedly drafting a protocol with Oman to manage maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. The move comes amid rising tensions in the Gulf, where Iranian attacks on commercial ships have disrupted a critical global shipping route. Officials said the agreement aims to ensure safer navigation for vessels while maintaining Iran's security concerns in the region. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most important choke points through which a significant portion of global oil supplies pass. The protocol could help prevent accidents and reduce the risk of further escalations. Joining us now live, we have Alison Matla, former AP Bureau Chief of Romania, joining us from Bucharest in Romania. Thanks very much for joining us once again on the bulletin, Alison. It's a pleasure to have you back. Now, do you think that we will see anything come out of these negotiations between Oman and Iran? Of course, Iran has legislated recently their own toll booth system for ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. But it remains to be seen whether Oman will agree to cooperate with this system.
There's all these kind of negotiations going on between different players in the region, with Pakistan, Iran, the United States saying they're near a sort of some agreement, Iran scoffing at that and saying they're not. Now we're hearing this with Oman. It's very difficult to know what is going on and which talks, if any, will produce any results, any progress of any kind. So it's really hard to say, because both sides, when they say we're having talks, they want to push a certain point of view, and then the other side has another point of view and saying, no, we're not having talks, so no agreement has been reached. there was, I think Donald Trump was saying that there were talks, and I think the Iranian foreign minister said yes, he'd had, you know, some contact with Steve Witkoff, which is one of Trump's envoys, but he said they didn't amount to negotiations. So I think this is just what they're saying in public, and it's very hard to get a real understanding, get a real grasp of what is happening, and who is talking, not just who is talking to who, what constitutes negotiations, what constitutes talks. I think progress will only be seen on any bilateral talks or trilateral talks when both sides announce the same thing. Then we can be certain. At the moment, we're in the middle of a war. It's a very complex, complicated war. Every side has different interests. And, you know, almost you can't believe anything until two opposing sides say the same thing. And then we can reach a conclusion that an agreement has been made. Other than that, it's posturing for the moment. There may be progress, we don't know. But until both sides are on the same page and come out with a joint statement, I think we should take things to a certain extent with a pinch of salt.
Mm-hmm. Alison, please don't go far. We're just moving to our next development. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that the Middle East was on the brink of a wider war, urging the US and Israel to halt a conflict he said was inflicting immense human suffering and risking serious economic damage worldwide. At UN headquarters, Guterres said the crisis had entered its second month with civilian suffering, destruction and threats to regional and global stability worsening by the day. He also called on Iran to stop attacking its neighbours and warned that any sustained disruption to freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz would raise food and energy costs, hitting the world's poorest countries. He said diplomatic efforts were underway to find a peaceful solution and announced he was dispatching his personal envoy, Jean Arnaud, to the region to support those efforts. Here's in fact what he said.
The Middle East crisis has lurched into its second month. Every day this war continues, human suffering grows, the scale of devastation grows, indiscriminate attacks grow, the target of civilians and civilian infrastructure grows, and the perils to our world grow. We are on the edge of a wider war that would engulf the whole Middle East with dramatic impacts around the globe. The conflict is already being felt everywhere. Look no further than the impact of the denial of freedom of navigation. When the Strait of Hormuz is strangled, the world's poorest and most vulnerable cannot breathe. We see it in the daily lives of people struggling with rising food and energy costs, from the Philippines to Sri Lanka to Mozambique to communities far beyond. Many aspects of the conflict may be uncertain, but one thing is not. If the drums of war keep beating, escalation will only make all of these worse. The spiral of death and destruction must stop. Diplomatic efforts are underway to find a peaceful path forward. They deserve the space and support to succeed, anchored firmly in international law, including the UN Charter. Disputes must be settled peacefully. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of all member states must be respected. Civilians and civilian infrastructure, including nuclear installations, must be respected and protected. And freedom of navigation must be upheld.
Now, Alison, we've heard there Antonio Guterres urging an end to this war. We've also heard a build-up of American troops in the region. There's been talks, as you mentioned earlier, of negotiating points passed between the two parties. Antonio Guterres there is urging for this war to stop, for this human suffering to stop, for the civilians in the region to stop being affected. Could we see an end to this war? What effect will his statements have on diplomatic negotiations? Could we see diplomatic negotiations at this stage? It looks like it could go either way at this point.
I mean, what Guterres said, Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN, said, he's right. I mean, civilian populations are suffering. It's the poorest who are suffering. We have 3 million people displaced in Iran. We have the situation in Lebanon. We have, the shipping has been choked off in the Strait of Hormuz, which is causing a fuel crisis all over the world and causing inflation. He's totally right about that. And unlike what I said before, when it's, each side has a particular interest, the UN does represent the interests of the world. And it's certainly not against Iran and the Arab countries. So I think it's important that he said it, and what he said, no sort of reasonable person could disagree with what he was saying. So I think it's important that he said it, and I think he has to keep on saying it. I mean, maybe it will help nudge the world powers, the warring sides towards peace. I know that Donald Trump obviously clearly wants to get out of the war ASAP. Iran, not so clear it wants to. It does have some kind of power. It doesn't mind its citizens dying. It probably doesn't mind the people being displaced. I mean, they have people like the Red Crosses inside helping people. So I think that it's important that the UN, which is a global power, and it is about world peace, has spoken, and he's spoken good sense. But whether it has an impact, particularly at this moment, is hard to say. As you said, it could go one way or the other. But I think it's important for the UN to keep sending this message.
Alison, don't go far. We're just moving now to some breaking news. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said US and Israeli attacks on Iran violate international law, Chinese state media reported. Wang made the remarks during calls with EU, German and Saudi counterparts. He emphasised that the UN Security Council, where China is a permanent member, must act to prevent escalation of the conflict. The comments come as the Council debates a draft resolution on the use of force in the strategic Strait of Hormuz, a key waterway for global oil shipments. The head of the Red Cross in Iran, Maria Martinez, has said that the emergency medical needs in Iran are rising exponentially, calling for more support and voicing concerns about its ability to restock supplies if the more than month-long war endures. According to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, which is the only nationwide humanitarian organisation operating there, reports that over 1,900 people have been killed since the US-Israeli airstrikes on Iran began over a month ago, and over 21,000 people injured. The aid group, which has 100,000 responders across the country's 31 provinces, as well as its own factories, helicopters and rescue dogs, provides first aid for those injured by airstrikes and support for the displaced. Maria has said that for now, Red Cross is not facing supply shortages, but lacks funding and is facing delays and cost increases for imports. While not attributing blame on anyone for the killings, Martinez said that 3 of the IFRC's rescue workers have been killed while on duty since February 28th, including a relief worker during an airstrike on March 31st that hit a medical clinic in Zanjan province. Martinez has voiced concerns about the humanitarian needs in the country increasing further because of future attacks on infrastructure. Listen in to what she had to say.
The humanitarian situation in the country is worsening by the day. The conflict has triggered a large scale of internal displacements within the first 2 weeks. We estimate that at least 3% of the population has been displaced. This represents around 1 million families, 3 million people. So, yes, the humanitarian priorities include search and rescue. The strikes continue across the country.
Back to you, Alison. Hearing there from the head of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies there in Iran, Maria Martinez, about the impact of this war on the humanitarian side in Iran. Now, what can we expect to see long term from these attacks, from these strikes on the people of Iran? If they do end up with regime change, if they don't end up with regime change, of course these impacts will last for weeks, months, perhaps years. What do you foresee happening for the people of Iran the day after this war ends, especially with the humanitarian impacts that we've seen so far?
Yeah, it's a tragic situation because we have a massive humanitarian impact. And unlike in other wars, we don't have a single journalists, proper international journalists on the ground. I mean, you have the state news agencies in Iran, but we don't have any reports. So this is a lone voice, a rare voice. And you know, as your report said, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, is the only humanitarian organization allowed there. This is a very oppressive country, and it's a country that doesn't really care about its citizens. So I think that you know that they are very secondary to the ruling class, the IRGC, and they will be suffering. I mean, Iran says nothing about its citizens. It says nothing about the humanitarian disaster. Okay, it allows the Red Crescent in, but they're the only people speaking for them. And we've heard these reports over 3 million, but there's been no reports. You don't have nor any of the normal press reports you would get during a war. So I think these are the real victims of this war. And I don't see, I mean, once, you know, the bombing stops and there is some solution reached, or, you know, whatever that may be, I see these are the people that will continue to suffer, you know, in terms of medical care, in terms of food, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of, you know, maybe their homes have been bombed or damaged, particularly in the big cities. And I don't see their rulers, their leaders, the Iranian leaders, well, the current ones at least, caring about them at all. So they are the victims.
Indeed, a tragic situation all round. Alison, thanks very much for joining us today on the Bulletin. We're now moving to some breaking news. 18 European countries called for an immediate halt to fighting between Israel and Hezbollah as the conflict reaches 1 month. Foreign ministers from Italy, Spain, Belgium, Poland, Ireland and other nations issued a joint statement urging both sides to stop military action. The statement emphasised respect for Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, warning against any post-war plans that could threaten southern Lebanon. Our next development, the United States expressed support for Panama after China was accused of detaining Panama-flagged ships. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the actions raised concerns about using economic tools to undermine Panama's rule of law. The dispute follows Panama's Supreme Court decision in January to invalidate the legal framework granting Hong Kong-based C.K. Hutchison the right to operate terminals on the Panama Canal. Washington and Beijing have both accused each other of seeking control over the strategic waterway, which connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The US Federal Maritime Commission is closely monitoring the surge in detentions. Now we're joined by Collins Yu Keat, a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joining us now from Kuala Lumpur. Collins, thanks so much for your time today and joining us once again on the Bulletin. What do you make of this latest update coming out of Panama? Of course, we saw this, these events start in January, and we've seen comments from both China and the United States saying that both parties are looking to control this crucial waterway. How will China possibly deal with this, the impact of this case? Of course, with another crucial shipping channel now much more restricted for them than it was before.
Well, this is not being seen just as a maritime inspection issue. Of course, it's being framed by Washington as a case of this economic and strategic coercion by China against Panama. Of course, the US is the key actor here. And of course, these statements suggest that the US sees these detentions as part of this broader pressure campaign being used by China as part of this gray zone coercive campaign to of course also to consolidate the presence of Beijing in this part of the world and right in the nose of the US, and we have seen how this has caused concerns in the conventional dominance of the US in the Western Hemisphere. And what Rubio is signaling now is basically to say that you know, the US will treat this as more than a shipping dispute. It is a matter of sovereignty, it's a matter of legal autonomy, also a matter of strategic competition with China, and of course to protect the interests of the US. And of course it's sending a right message, a positive message to Panama that Washington is right behind you. And of course it's not being seen as a minor case because it will have these ripple effects across these global shipping trade flows. And of course it's being made more critical and strategic you know, from the current situation in the Strait of Hormuz. This also means the future of supply chain security, the future of global trade routes, and of course the future of the Chinese presence here in this part of the world. And of course China, and how far the threshold for China to go in terms of using this economic leverage just stopping short of this open conflict, all these notions of salami slicing, gray zone coercive campaign, and all these are not being tolerated by Washington. This is what, Rubio is trying to say, that of course, whether it's in Panama, whether it's in Southeast Asia, or even East Asia, the stretch and the threshold of the reach and the might of the U.S. military will not be dismissed, and that of course, although now being taken into greater consideration with regards to this conflict in Iran, the U.S. still maintains the capacity to have this multiple theater of power presence, and without being distracted by what China maybe is trying to leverage upon now, trying to create new openings, hoping for new distraction by the for the U.S. in West Asia, and trying to move in deeper in Panama, in this part of the world as well. Ruby.
Collins, thanks very much for your comments today, and once again for coming onto the show. 4 astronauts soared into the space today, marking the first time humans have ventured toward the moon in over 5 decades. With an intense roar that reverberated far beyond the launch pad, the enormous orange and white rocket carried 3 Americans and 1 Canadian away from Florida's Kennedy Space Center at approximately 1:05 p.m. GMT. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen are currently navigating the Orion spacecraft on a 10-day trajectory. This flight path will take them around the lunar far side, reaching distances from Earth never before achieved by human travellers. Artemis II serves as a vital technical rehearsal for a manned landing scheduled for 2028. NASA is prioritising safety and sustainable infrastructure, aiming eventually to establish a permanent base. The Orion capsule will eventually splash down in the Pacific Ocean, concluding a journey that has effectively reopened the gateway to the stars. In order to discuss the mission further, we are being joined by Shauna Pandya, the first named female commercial Canadian astronaut who will be flying to space with the Virgin Galactic Delta class of spacecraft with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences as early as 2026. Thank you, Shauna Pandya, for joining us. My first question to you is, how do you feel seeing the successful on-time launch of Artemis II?
It just feels incredible. This is not only a win for NASA, it's not just a win for the Canadian Space Agency, but today, 54 years after humans last went to the moon, humanity is united in the leading edge of exploration. Humans are going back. They're going back to stay. And I think everyone, regardless of whether they're in India, in the US, in Canada, every corner of this planet should be extremely proud of what has been achieved today.
Indeed. So how crucial is this mission for mankind?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the value of big undertakings like exploration class missions, like the Artemis mission, so what we mean by this is missions to the moon, Mars, and beyond. This is just a first step. And so the crux of this mission and why it's so important is this really is the test mission. This is the proving ground for proving that the Orion closed loop life support system can support the crew, that the crew can adequately work and interface with the hardware and the crew capsule itself. So everything that comes after this will owe all of its success to what happened on the Artemis II mission. And so when we look at why we explore, it's for the scientific return, it's for the exploration return, it's for the technology spin-offs. There's so much that we get from doing these massive collaborative international space missions like the Artemis II mission.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people wonder why humans are still exploring the moon. Similar questions were raised during Chandrayaan-2. Although this mission does not land on the moon, why is such exploration important?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually I would point back to Chandrayaan-3 as the perfect example of what we're still uncovering about our moon. It's been there for billions of years, but we're only just now confirming the presence of ice at the South Poles. And when we know that there is ice on another planetary body, this solves a lot of problems about resource extraction, resource utilization, both for extracting water, for finding fuel. And so why does it matter that we go beyond the confines of our planet? Because there's resources, there's science, there's knowledge out there to be discovered. And more than that, there's a survival imperative. There's 8 billion humans in one planet, on one planet right now. And so there's all these planetary threats that we think about, maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but that we have to think about if we're serious about the survival of our species. So there could be asteroids, it could be climate change. So being able to prove that we can survive off-world is also a very inherent and important to the survival of our species.
And so Canadian astronaut Hansen is also part of Artemis 2. How important is it when space exploration becomes one about collaboration and not race? And not a race?
That's such a beautiful question. In this era, it's so easy to think that, we've done this. We've sent humans, we've sent a rocket to the moon, to orbit the moon, and they make it look easy, but the amount of men and women and hours of work that went into this. And so there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of resources. And so when we work together across borders, across disciplines, bringing on the first non-US nation, in this case Canada, it really underscores how much of an international, global, collaborative effort this is.
And so how is the preparation going for your mission, ma'am? What have you enjoyed the most?
Yeah, so preparation for my own spaceflight is underway. We will be flying with Virgin Galactic's Delta class of spacecraft as early as the end of this year or early next year. And so folks who have been following my journey may remember that we have key priority areas of research in women's health, health technology, neuroscience, and the physical sciences. So all of that is still underway. So we're working on publishing some of the initial tests that we've done in zero-G flights. And we have a few more zero-G or parabolic flight training flights coming up with our crew for this year. So I'm really excited for that. All of that's happening in the background. And, it's every single day brings us closer to flight.
Artemis 2 will be the furthest a human has gone. What challenges does a human body face in such a prolonged mission?
Yeah, so the challenges of this mission are not that it's not the same as a long duration International Space Station mission, for example. And so the Artemis mission will only be 10 days, but at the same time, the astronauts are still in this closed, confined capsule. They're subjected to the weightlessness of the spaceflight environment. As far as they're going, they actually have a lot more radiation to contend with than when you're closer to Earth. You still have the protective confines of the Earth's magnetosphere. And then there's just the psychology of just being so far. These are the loneliest humans in the universe right now. And so they have each other. They have to be good teammates. They have to support each other. And, a lot of the risk mitigation has been done pre-flight, but this crew is highly trained. So as different challenges crop up, they will be working as a crew to solve problems in real time. And so, you just have to be ready for anything. You have to stay calm and you have to work as a team.
Christina Koch is also a part of the crew. How encouraging is it when women like her and you are making significant strides in space exploration?
I'm so glad you asked that question. This is the first time in history a woman has gone beyond low Earth orbit. Christina Koch is the first woman in the history of all of humanity to go on a cislunar mission. She will be doing a lunar flyby. And so children growing up today, babies born today, for them it will be totally normal that women are astronauts who go to the moon. And I think that the moment that has been captured here today, the spark that has been ignited, I think it will galvanize a whole new future generation of explorers, astronauts, physicians, scientists, engineers, pilots. And I think that is an incredible moment that we should be inspired by, that we should bask in, and especially the legacy of Christina Koch, I think is going to inspire a whole lot more young women to pursue astronautics and STEM fields.
Can you help our viewers understand about the Virgin Galactic Delta class mission? By when can we expect the launch, and what are you set to achieve?
Yeah, so with my own space flight with Virgin Galactic's Delta class mission, this is a commercial space flight, and this will actually be much closer to Earth in a suborbital mission. And so with us right now, we're waiting on Virgin Galactic to build us a spaceship. So they are currently in the assembly phase. What happens next is Delta needs to undergo internal testing. That includes passing critical safety checks. And then eventually what happens as the Delta class passes all these internal checks is they proceed to external testing, including uncrewed flights, so flights with maybe science on them but no people. And then finally, Delta will be cleared for flying, including flying myself and my crew. And so for us, with our mission, we are focusing on research in a number of priority areas. And for us, women's health is very, very important. That's one of our priority areas of research. And happens to be that women's health is not just under-researched on Earth, but also in space, because to date, only about 14% of astronauts have been women. So we're hoping to advance some of our knowledge in women's physiology. We also have a number of other priority areas in neuroscience and health technology, as well as the physical sciences. And then finally, it's really important that the research that we do up in space also has positive benefits back on Earth. So that's what we'll be aiming to do with our mission.
And so finally, Shauna, where do you think space exploration is heading next? Can we reach Mars? What excites you?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we look at one of the key objectives of the whole Artemis series of missions, so beyond Artemis 2 is a test flight, and everything that comes after will have been had the foundation laid by Artemis 2. So what happens next, Artemis 3, 4, 5, this is a plan to return humans to the surface of the moon, to establish permanent surface operations on the moon with a view towards increasing lunar exploration, increasing our ability to learn deep space science, sun observation, Earth observation, lunar observation, and then finally using the moon as a test bed for Mars. So Mars is much, much further away than the moon. So it makes sense to highlight, to learn, to test out key protocols and operations on the moon, which is a little bit closer, but still far enough away to give us a good sense of the risks that we might encounter on the red.
Shauna, thank you so much for your time today and telling us all about the Artemis 2 and your work. It's been brilliant to hear about your work so far, and I'm very excited to see what we can see come in 2026 for space exploration. And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.